Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course breakdown for the first event of 2024, the Sentry Tournament of Champions. Excited to get into golf content once again, and here in this video, gonna make sure you have all the info that you need for this week to go out there, have yourself a week with DFS out there on the prop side as well, with all the information about the Kapalua Plantation course. So a lot to get into here. Let's not waste any time at all. First, start off with some course details over there in Kapalua. On top of being one of the more beautiful destinations that the tour will head to all year, it's also maybe the most scoreable course that we get. We've had scoring averages close to 5 under par around Kapalua, and you're likely, especially if the wind stays down, to see fireworks out there, maybe even a 25 30 under par type of winner. And really, from the overhead surface, that other than the fact that it's a par 73, of course, that's going to lead to some slightly better scoring. But at 7,600 yards, it's hard to believe that it actually plays to a 5 under par average. But the one thing that the scorecard yardage won't tell you is all the different elevation changes around Kapalua. It's kind of like Augusta National, a few of the other courses with a bunch of elevation change. You're going to get 30, sometimes 40-yard drops into greens, and off the tee, some rollouts of 50, even upwards of 100 yards, like on hole 18. So the 7,600 yards probably plays closer to 7,000 yards. And if you look at some of the winners over the last decade, especially like 4 or 5 years ago, you start to see the shorter hitters coming in. So Harris English, right? I know he's not a shorter hitter, but he's not really known as a bomber. And if you start to go back to the mid, like 2015 range, you've got like Patrick Reed winning in 2015, Zach Johnson, right? One of the shorter hitters on tour, won this tournament in 2014. Steve Stricker won it in 2012. Jonathan Bird in 2011, and Jeff Ogilvy all the way back in 2010. And I know we've had guys like DJ win here multiple times. In fact, JT, John Rahm here last year. But when you start to get into the stats, the analytics out there with Kapalua, you start to look at where players are gaining a lot of strokes. It's not with their distance off the tee. So, though it is a scoreable course, this isn't one that's really a bomber's paradise. Because of how wide the fairways are, pretty much everyone is going to hit them. And on top of that, because of the rollout that you're getting, some of those severe elevation changes I was talking about, even a shorter hitter like Zach Johnson will get that extra 50 yards. It's going to be hitting pretty much the same club as the other players around them, maybe, a 1-2 club difference. So that's why you've seen some of the shorter hitters find success. In general, this is more of a putting contest than anything, and I'd say a little bit of an irons fest, right? If everyone's going to be playing from the same spots, the players that are going to be able to separate themselves are the ones that can hit the best iron shots, right? Give themselves the most opportunities. When you got to get to something like 25 to 30 under par to win, you better be an aggressive iron player and a player that's towards the top of the birdie or better metrics. So we'll obviously go into more detail later on when we get into our key stats, but this golf course, though it is long on paper, is probably a little bit less driver heavy than I think most people would expect. In terms of your course setup, there are only 3 par 3s on site, so that's a little bit unique there. And there's still only 4 par 5s, so how they end up getting to a par 73 is one of the par 3s is a par 4 on this sort of setup. So still only the 4 par 5s to work with, but very scoreable, right? A lot of the par 4s are shorter. You have multiple that are under 400 yards, and then with the elevation changes, even the longer par 4s that are over 500 yards play closer to the 450 to 460 range. So it's a little bit, I would say, misleading if you're looking at some of the scorecard yardages this week. It's definitely a unique one from that perspective. In terms of your scoring stats, you have a 72.2% fairway rate here, which is about 13% higher than your tour average. Your green and regulation percentage is really high, as you'd expect with those massive greens, at 81% compared to the tour average of 65%. Your scrambling rate is also about 6% higher than the tour average, showing you that resort style course isn't all that difficult to get up and down at. And your birdies per round is at 5.5, which is by far the highest that you're going to find in all the PGA Tour, which is almost a solid 2 birdies more per round than your tour average out there. So you're going to see plenty of birdies. It's going to be real easy to hit the fairways and the greens, which means the one place you're going to have to separate yourselves, right, is getting the ball closer to the hole and then converting on those putting opportunities. A few other things we'll point out about this track. It is Bermuda grass from tip to toe. So a few different types of Bermuda out there. The greens are Tifigo Bermuda, and then everywhere else it is a celebration Bermuda. So when we're looking at our around the green stats, when we're looking at some of the putting metrics with our key stats. We want to be focusing on the Bermuda grass surface. On top of that, we don't have that much rough out there. There's not massive patches of rough in between holes. It's little, I'd say like 5, maybe 10-yard strips of rough. So you're not going to see a ton of shots out of the rough. And in fact, if you take a look at the approach distribution for this week, it is a lot of shots out of the fairway. In fact, out of all of the rounds, right, so on average here, you're only going to hit about 2.5 balls out of the rough per round, whereas in terms of your approach shots, it's nearly 15, 16 out of the fairway. So the fairway percentage at 72.2% is actually a little bit higher the last 2 years. And if we end up getting a soft course this time around, kind of like we've had the last 2 times here, you might see a 75, even 80% fairway percentage. So this track is meant for resort guests. It's beautiful. You know, like I said, one of the more scenic properties that we have in the entire year. But with the elevation changes, with some of the hanging lies, it plays a lot like Augusta National, right? Augusta National has pretty large greens, has relatively wide fairways, right? They're not nearly as wide as what you're going to get this week. But that course, it is all about your iron play, right? Putting the ball in the right spot and then putting on some tricky greens. And when we get to our comps, you'll see that Augusta National is my #1 comp this week. So if you're looking for that kind of style, right, it's why the Jordan Spieths have won here, right? It's why Justin Thomas has won at this golf course. Heck, Jon Rahm, your winner at the Masters last year, a reason why I bet Jon Rahm at this course, you know, and actually at Augusta afterwards, after he won here, right? He won. It was one of my top comps for Augusta. A lot of correlation there. Cam Smith, right, has played pretty well at Augusta National. Xander Schauffele, right, second place finisher at Augusta, right, he won back here in 2019. DJ, a winner at the Masters, right, won this in 2018. Now, this field, right, is the strongest in golf, right? A lot of the best players are just going to tee it up here, but the parallels are just insane, right? Jordan Spieth, right, has the scoring record at this golf course. Of course, Masters is one of his best golf tournaments out there. So we'll talk about the comps a little bit later on. Definitely has an Augusta feel to it, but should be a fun one for these players to tackle. Now we'll take a quick look through some of the holes from an overhead view and give you an idea of some of the topography and shots that the players are going to face. So hole number 1, you can't really see it from this overhead view, but it's a great example of what players will face. There's a massive slope here that goes down to the rough, and a lot of players will be landing their drives, sometimes even a 3-wood up near this marker, and rolling out the whole way through the fairway and into the rough here. So this is one of the holes where not many fairways are going to be hit, and really there's no difference in consequence, right? You'll roll down to the bottom of the hill, the rough isn't very long around this track, and you'll leave yourself about a mid-iron into this green. And on top of the little slope here, right, that goes down to this valley, there's another drop off the whole way down to the hole. So you're going to see elevation changes off the tee into some of the greens around the property, and a lot of fairways that you end up missing by default, right? Unless you were to lay up back on top of the slope back here, you're pretty much by default going to go into the rough. So that's an idea of what you can expect here and why Zach Johnson, right, some of the shorter hitters back there like 10 years ago, were finding so much success around Kapalua. Hole number 2 is 220. It's a longer par 3. This one's a pretty standard hole, but you can see just how large these green complexes are. Hole 3 is 426. This is another relatively straightforward hole, massive fairway area as you guys can see. And then, you know, depending on pin location, they can trip up these players a little bit, but around the green, other than bunkers, there's not much to trip you up, right? If you were going to miss into this natural area, it's a 30, 40-yard miss, which is just not going to happen very often for these tour players. Hole 4 is 421. Another mid-length par 4 that plays slightly uphill. This is a scoreable hole. Once again, unless you miss like 30, 40 yards offline, you've got all this grass to work with, and around the green, pretty much the same scenario as last hole. Hole 5 is your first par 5. This one is extremely reachable. Does play slightly uphill with your tee shot, but your second shot is playing slightly downhill. So you're going to see a lot of people get there into quite a few eagles at hole number 5. Hole 6 is 424. It's another one of those mid-length par 4s that plays slightly downhill on both shots, and you might even see players get up near the green. Back when Dustin Johnson won this 4 or 5 years ago, he was able to get the ball just to the front of the surface. So at 424, right, would normally be completely unreachable because of the slopes at Kapalua are actually a lot shorter than they look on the scorecard yardage. Hole number 7 is 523. So this one is a par 4 here, but once again, it plays wildly downhill. Your first shot's about 15 yards downhill. Everything is going to roll in the direction of the hole. And then your second shot is another 20 yards downhill. So I know 524 looks a little bit daunting, but once again, it does not play nearly to that length. Hole 8 is 197. You can get in a little bit of trouble if you leave it short, but unless it's a front pin, you're probably not worrying about that. So for resort style guests, this little natural area would probably come into play, but not so much for these tour pros. Hole 9 is a par 5. This one is 549, and once again, it is going to be reachable. Plays slightly uphill on both shots, but at just 549, you're probably hitting a 3-wood, maybe even a long iron into this green, and you're going to see a lot of eagle looks there too. On the back 9, you also have plenty of scoring available. Hole number 10 plays slightly uphill for your tee shot and then is pretty flat into the green. So most players here are going to take a 3-wood, hit it up on top of the hill, and then have a perfect wedge distance in. So the uphill holes, a lot of the shorter, mid-length par 4s do play uphill, but you're leaving these players, something between a pitching wedge and I'd say like a 5, maybe a 6 iron on a lot of those holes, which they're going to be very precise with. Hole 11's a par 3, 168, pretty run-of-the-mill, large green complex there too. Hole 12 is 424, another one that plays slightly downhill on your second shot. And this one, you can kind of get it up near the green. You're going to see a few players that are aggressive, probably get it within like 60, 70 yards of the middle. But a lot of guys, especially your shorter hitters, this is a hole to lay it back, right? Hit a 3-wood off the tee, maybe you take a little bit something off the driver, do a, 10, what is it, an 8-fingered driver shot out there is what some people would call it. Just it's a run-of-the-mill hole, wide open off the tee. You're going to set up a birdie look. Next one is 385. Again, it plays slightly uphill here, but once again, another shorter hole. Hole 14 is only 306 yards. Though this plays slightly uphill, you can try and take it at the green, and you'll see some of the longer hitters try to do so. Hole 15 is a par 5, another reachable par 5, and also plays slightly up the hill. Hole 16 is 375. This hole is another shorter little wedge in, and the back 9, if you can't tell, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 holes, it's a birdie luck every single time. Hole 17 is one of the hardest holes on site. It's one of the few non-birdie looks here on the back 9. It is 554. The plays closer to like 450 yards. So a couple reasons for that. You have a massive slope going down to the rough here. You'll see a few players get over here just in front of the rough, and a lot of people that hit it to the right that end up the whole way down near this patch to the right. In either scenario, you're going to be left with like 150, 160 yard shot. And unless you're not able to get it to roll down the hill, I mean, you might be left with 200 yards at the very most. And you can see they have it at a 350 yard drive. These pro visualizers are not set up for tour pros, right? These tour pros are going to carry the ball 15, 20 yards further than where they have their markers at. So this hole, it looks a little bit daunting like some of the other holes that play downhill, but it's not nearly as difficult as what you'd expect. The real only issue you can get into here is if you hit a horrible drive on this hole, you're not going to get that slope there. And you've seen people over here in this rough patch on the right. You've seen a few people hit it too far to the left and end up on the boundary over here. If that happens, you have to lay up, right? There's pretty much no shot to the green unless you want to take on a whole lot of risk. So it's one of the holes that can trip you up out here. But if you hit a good drive and it's not that hard to hit this massive fairway that we have out here, you're going to be pretty good going into the green. And now lastly is a nearly 700 yard par 5, but just like last hole, plays severely downhill. So you're not going to have to worry about distance. If you're somebody that can hit a draw down the slope, everything slopes downhill here and also from right to left. If you can get that draw running shape down the hill, you can have less than 180 yards in. So you can see right here, this would be about a 300 yard shot in. Especially when it's firm and fast, which we've seen a few years, there are times you can get the ball the whole way down here. And you can see that would leave you about 200 and let's put target 2 actually on the green. That would leave you about 225 yards. So it is reachable in 2. A lot of players won't get all that rollout. We'll maybe have a 3-wood in rather than something like 220, right? Like a 3-iron or maybe a 4-iron into the green. But either way, it's a scoreable hole. If you're laying up with a 3-wood, a lot of people will hit it short right over here and just try and get up and down for the bird. All right, and now for our key stats. And like I mentioned before, because the off the tee isn't so important here, your number one key stat is shots gained approach, right? It's making sure you can hit the best shots from those spots where everyone's going to be driving the ball. So first off, this course is slightly penal around the green, but it's not nearly as difficult as most courses. We mentioned that the scrambling rate was about 7-8% higher at this course than what you have for the tour average, but it's not a true resort style where it's like a 75-80% scrambling rate. So you can still get into a few hairy spots. The greens are undulated. They're also a little bit raised to the rest of the property. So you can have some difficult shots around the green, but more important than anything is setting up all those birdie looks, right? You're not going to get into that much trouble, especially with nearly 9,000 square foot greens. But how you go out there, you get to a 25-30 under par is by hitting dart after dart, right? You're going to have a lot of wedges. You're going to have a lot of short irons into the green. Taking advantage of those opportunities is going to be how you get to that top of the leaderboard. Next up, we've got shots gained putting. So when you put yourself in position, right, going out there and cashing in on your opportunities. We have the Bermuda grass surface this week, so make sure to look at that for some of your advanced analytics. But with some slopey greens, so a little bit tricky. They can run a little fast for years when it's a little bit firmer and faster. That would be my number two key stat, right? Like this can be a little bit of a putting contest from time to time. It's a little bit ironic that Jon Rahm was our winner last year, but especially with some of your past champions, it's guys that go out there and are making everything. So number one is shots gained approach, especially if you're going to get into that top 5, top 10. But if you're going to win this golf tournament, you're also going to have a hot putter. And then lastly, we've got birdie or better percentage, right? So I'm looking for players that are extremely aggressive, that can go out there, go pin hunting on this sort of golf course. When your birdie or better rate for the field is going to be about 5.5, right? For our top end finishers, we need 7-8 birdies per round, right? We need to be birdieing almost half of our holes out there, especially if you want to win this damn thing. So the players that I'm looking here, for with my third key stat are the Abergs of the world, right? Go out there, just make a crap ton of birdies. Jon Rahm, right, was your number one birdie or better percentage player last year. Victor Hovland was up there, right? He's been pretty successful around this track. There's an art form to not only going out there and, keeping your round together, but around this track that is so wide open, it's more so about having that horsepower to go out there and actually get to 25-30 under par. So kind of like with the shots gained putting, right? Approach is going to kind of be how you keep your round together, right? How you don't give away a bunch of shots. Your putting is going to be how you cash in, and then your birdie or better percentage is going to be how many opportunities that you're giving yourself. So these three key stats are by far the most important this week. I'm not looking at a ton of around the green stuff out there. I'm not looking at a ton of just par saving stuff, right? And the 3-putt avoidance rate. I'm not looking at even with these massive greens, because you can't be making bogeys, right? It's got to be about setting up birdie opportunities and getting to that 25-30 under par mark. And in terms of comps, we've got 3 that I really like. One that we've already alluded to in Augusta National Golf Club. So the Masters, right, has some of the more slopey greens in all the PGA Tour. They're real difficult to get up and down on. And on top of that, they've got a bunch of elevation change around there and also a lot of uneven lies. So if you're looking for that creativity factor, if you're looking for some of that leaderboard crossover, you're going to get it in bunches with this golf course. And with our number 2 comp, you also get it, right? The St. Andrews Old Course. It's wide open off the tee. A lot of times you're getting extra rollout with how firm that link soil is. And the greens are even larger than what we have here at the Tournament of Champions. And if you're playing at St. Andrews this year, right, for the Open Championship, this would be the second biggest course when it comes to the green size. But since we're not playing there this time around, obviously the Tournament of Champions takes that crown. So if you're looking for big greens, that same type of creativity required, you can take a look at that. It is a link style golf course. It's flat, right? So you're not going to be really the same kind of situation as what we have with Augusta, but with the uneven lies, where you have all those dunes out there, you're going to get that factor to work with. And then in terms of your shot creation, right, it's wide open there. You have some of those large surfaces. A lot of the same stats we were looking at the old course are going to be what we're looking at this week at Kapalua. And then our last comp is, of course, we don't have a bunch of data from. We don't have shots gained data from it, which is really why I didn't put it up at number 1. But El Cardinal de Monte, right, it's where we played the Worldwide Technologies Championship for the first time this year, is like a carbon copy of this golf course. Now, it's a little bit more flat than we have this week. That would probably be the main difference, kind of like the old course, but it's Bermuda grass. I believe it's past Palm out there, but it's a similar type of surface. completely flat, bunch of undulations, and massive greens. Your largest fairways on tour out there, some of the larger greens as well. So when you're looking for, players that can just make a bunch of putts, right? Distance was a little bit of a factor at El Cardinal as well. A lot of crossover from that perspective. So unfortunately, right, we don't have all the data that we have there, especially compared to like a Masters or an Open Championship. But all three courses that require a similar skill set and that you can use for some of your crossover analysis. That is all I've got for the course breakdown this week. Of course, we'll have DFS stuff dropping throughout the week as well. We'll have a live stream Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. All the usual to make sure you're ready to go for all of your exposure this week. I appreciate the support here, guys. Go ahead, smash the like button if you haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the content in the future. I'm really looking forward to this season. It's a brand new start here with the FedEx Cup, with the new format for 2024. So let's enjoy it. Let's see some of the top players go out there and hopefully have ourselves a week here for the Tournament of Champions.